At its core, the legend of Atlantis is about an island kingdom that was punished by the gods for falling into decadence and defiance with a flood that wiped out the civilization and left few survivors. Scholars contend that Plato is the only source for this legend, but we can find the core elements of the Atlantis legend in variations of ancient myths from all around the world, and this isn't flim-flam. Recently, the Associated Press asked if geologists can relate ancient stories of great floods to real events. The answer appears to be yes. There are now peer-reviewed papers being published on the matter, one of which discusses myths about island creation through land submergence. And according to popular science, collecting ancient geomyths could give scientists new insights on climate change. So it's important not to view Plato as a singular authoritative source, but instead as a single perspective on a global flood myth, one voice among many which ought to be considered and studied. Perhaps the most well-known of the catastrophe myths is the legend of Noah's Ark from the Abrahamic religions, which sailed through the worldwide flood lasting 40 days and 40 nights that cleansed the earth of humanity as a punishment from God. The ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead tells how King Thoth brought his people to Egypt after his island kingdom in the west was destroyed by a flood. The Temple of Edfu also contains texts that tell of a primordial island of the gods that was destroyed by a massive deluge. The ancient Greeks said that the Bronze Age came to an end when Zeus destroyed humanity with a flood after being infuriated by an offensive human sacrifice, leaving only Deucalion to survive in an ark of his own making. The ancient Sumerians told the story of Utnapishtim, who carried his relatives and all species of animals on a ship when the Great Deluge destroyed the rest of mankind. In ancient Babylonia, Enlil advised the gods to destroy all humans with a flood, which Enki and Atrahasis escaped by building an ark. The Celts spoke of heaven being a giant which was cut up by the children of the earth. Heaven spilled blood onto the earth, causing a deluge which killed all of humanity except for a few survivors. In Africa, there is the tale of Oende, who appeared as an animal to a charitable man. This man gave everything he had to animals and was abandoned by his family and friends. When the man gave his last money to the disguised Oende, the god awarded the man with handfuls of flour that magically renewed itself and gave him other riches. Oende then sent a flood to wipe out the man's neighbors, and the man became the descendant of the present human race. In India, they speak of the lost continent of Kumari Kandam, which was destroyed and sank beneath a great flood. Hindus tell of the first human king Manu, who saves a fish from being eaten by a larger fish. The fish warned Manu that a great flood would come. Manu raised the fish until it was almost the size of the entire ocean. The fish then transformed into the god Vishnu, who then saved Manu from the flood. Afterward, Manu remarried and repopulated the earth. In the Philippines, they say that a flood destroyed all of humanity except one pregnant woman who was saved by a great eagle. In China, it is said that men were wicked in primeval times. The god Tse sent an avatar to Earth to ask for a live sacrifice. Only Dumun complied with the request, so Tse covered the earth with a flood and saved only Dumun. The Cherokees say that a dog warned his master of a flood and told his master that he must throw the dog into the water. The man and his family followed the dog's instructions and survived the flood. All mankind is descended from this family. The Zuni tribe in New Mexico say that a great flood once threatened to drown all of their people. They performed a human sacrifice to appease the gods, and the waters began to subside afterwards. The Maya spoke about a dwarf people who were wiped out by a great flood because their god was displeased with the lack of keeping their customs. The Incas said that Viracocha destroyed a race of giants that had become quarrelsome and lazy with a great flood. Viracocha saved 2 giants from the flood and used them to create a people of his own size. And of course, there are many more similar ancient myths from around the world. We are told by scholars that these ancient cultures had no contact with one another, but the striking similarities in these ancient flood myths suggest either a common experience or a common ancestry, perhaps both. One common element in these myths that is particularly interesting is how the few survivors of the flood oftentimes end up finding their way to the tops of submerged mountains. As many know from the Abrahamic religions, after the flood subsided, Noah's Ark came to rest on the peak of Mount Ararat. Ancient Greek myths say that Zeus destroyed the population of the Bronze Age with a flood, and only those who escaped to high mountains survived. In Central Asia, the Altaics say that the sea god Tengis told the man Nama to build an ark. Tengis then flooded the earth, and when the flood subsided, Nama's ark came to rest on the summit of a mountain. In Mongolia, an old man who knew a flood was coming boarded an iron raft with his family. They survived the flood when the raft landed at a high wooded mountain. In Australia, there's a legend of a great flood that wiped out most of humanity. The few survivors escaped by taking refuge at the top of the mountain Bibirrinda, near the Bay of Cape Cleveland. The Maori from New Zealand say that the hero Tahaki was beaten and left for dead. Tahaki survived and went into a high mountain with his family. He asked the gods for revenge, and they sent a flood to kill everyone on Earth. Tahaki and his family survived. Eskimos talk of a very high mountain that rose in the middle of a flooded Earth where animals and people escaped to survive. The Lakota tell of a few people climbing to the highest mountain to survive a flood caused by the water monster Unctehi. The Tarahumara of northern Mexico say that God sent a flood to drown the people who are always fighting amongst themselves. After the flood, a boy and girl climbed down from Mountain Lavachi, who then repopulated the earth. In Chile, the Araucanians speak of 2 great serpents that had a contest to decide which of them had greater magic. The contest caused earthquakes and flooding, and the people took refuge on the mountain Thegtheg. And there are many more examples of flood survivors taking refuge on the peaks of submerged mountains in ancient myths all over the world. So it might make sense to be looking for the survivors of Atlantis somewhere in the high elevations of mountain ranges. The legend of Atlantis would have originated with those survivors, and perhaps the location of Atlantis itself can be found near those mountaintop refugee settlements. If we can trace the transmission of Plato's Atlantis myth to a point of origin, it might lead us to the survivors of Atlantis itself. If those survivors happen to live in high mountain regions, then that provides further evidence that supports the truth of the Atlantis myth.